I built his empire for 26 years. Then my ex left me. At the gala, his fiancée, my best friend, laughed that I was looking for a rich husband until the chairman called my name. Honestly, I still can't believe this happened. I was at a charity gala, ready for a fresh start, when my ex-husband, with my former best friend draped on his arm, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Here to find yourself a rich husband." What do you even do in a moment like that? It was Saturday night, 6:42 p.m., and my shoes were already pinching at the Franklin Family House Gala in downtown Columbus. I'd almost worn flats, and instantly regretted not doing so. I was in a simple navy dress I'd bought on sale, wearing my mom's pearl earrings. Nothing flashy, nothing trying to impress. But apparently my ex, Rick, saw things differently. There he was, standing beside Melissa. Her hand was tucked through his arm, like it had always belonged there. Once upon a time, that same hand had passed me coffee across my kitchen table. Life, it seems, has a twisted sense of humor. Melissa saw me first. Her smile spread slowly, a snake in the grass.
Claire.
Melissa, I didn't realize you were coming tonight. That was her special talent, a subtle jab wrapped in politeness, making you doubt yourself. Then Rick turned. For a second, time froze. He looked the same, but not. 55, more gray at the temples, in an expensive tuxedo. The posture of a man who expected rooms to know his name. His eyes dropped to my invitation and then that smirk. Here to find yourself a rich husband. Melissa gave that little, performative laugh, a contribution, not genuine joy. A knot tightened in my stomach. There was a time I would have fired back defensively about my own money, about being invited. And then I would have driven home, replaying it, wondering if I sounded desperate.
Divorce teaches you a lot.
One lesson? Not every insult deserves your full committee meeting of a response. So, I turned away, handed my invitation to the young woman at registration. Claire Bennett. She scanned the QR code. For 2 agonizing seconds, I thought something was wrong. Had Daniel's assistant forgotten me? Was I about to become that middle-aged woman arguing over a charity invitation while my ex-husband savored every moment?
But then, she straightened.
Looked at me. Reached for her radio. Quietly, she said, "Tell the chairman she's here." Behind me, Rick's voice cut through the air. "What's that supposed to mean?" I turned, a small, defiant smile playing on my lips. "I imagine it means I'm here." His forehead tightened. Melissa's smile vanished. Before they could say another word, Daniel Mercer appeared. Daniel, 67, tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who'd achieved everything without needing to brag. He'd retired years ago, only to become busier. The moment he saw me, his face lit up. "There you are." He took my hand, pulled me into a quick hug. "You made it." "Said I would," I replied. He chuckled. "Yes, but people say all sorts of things when formal wear is involved." He glanced briefly at Rick, then back at me. "Claire, I need 5 minutes upstairs before we start." That caught me off guard.
"Now."
"Afraid so." He motioned to an event staffer. "Rachel, would you take Claire up to the small conference room?" Then, lowering his voice, "I'll meet you there." I nodded. Rick stepped forward. "Daniel?" Daniel offered a polite smile. "Rick, good to see you." That was it. No warm handshake, no extra conversation. Rick noticed. I knew him for 26 years. I saw the flicker of confusion. Stepping into the elevator with Rachel, watching the doors close, I wish I could say I felt triumphant. I didn't. 18 months earlier, I would have given anything to see Rick looking confused while someone important hurried to greet me. Back then, I was still stuck in that loop, imagining scenarios where he finally realized what he'd thrown away. But mostly, I just felt tired. You get surprisingly tired of wanting someone to regret losing you. Rick and I were married for 26 years. We met young. He had a beat-up pickup, 3 good shirts, and a construction business that was mostly him, 1 employee, and me answering the phone. I did the books from our kitchen table, typed invoices after Emily went to sleep, brought sandwiches to job sites, and sat through endless dinners with bankers, clients, men who always shook Rick's hand first. To be fair, Rick worked incredibly hard,
He built that company.
but I helped build the life that let him do it. Somewhere along the way, we both forgot that. By the time Bennett Commercial had a real office, 30 employees, and its name all over Central Ohio, I'd become something Rick introduced, instead of someone he consulted. My wife, Claire, was usually the whole resume. Then came Melissa, my friend for almost 20 years. She knew where I kept the spare key, knew how I took my coffee. She sat by me at the hospital when my mother was dying, brought food afterward because I couldn't remember to eat. That's the part people don't always grasp about betrayal. It's not just what someone does. It's what they knew before they did it. The marriage finally cracked open over messages. Months of them. Nothing graphic, nothing overtly scandalous. The one that haunted me was almost boring. Rick had written, "Claire wouldn't understand." Melissa answered, "She never really understood you." I read that sentence 3 times. Melissa, who had sat in my kitchen until midnight, listening to me complain about Rick's snoring, Emily's college applications, my mother's chemo. Apparently, I had misunderstood my entire marriage. Rick insisted nothing physical happened until after we separated. Maybe that was true. I stopped investigating. Once your husband starts explaining which technical category of cheating he fits into, things are not exactly going well. The elevator doors opened. Rachel led me down a quiet hall to a conference room overlooking the ballroom. Daniel arrived within a minute. He closed the door. His face had changed. No jokes now. I set my purse down. What happened? He took a breath. "Claire, we have a problem." My mind immediately leaped to the fundraising match. Did someone back out?
No.
He pulled out a chair. And unfortunately, Rick is involved. He slid a printed email across the table. But before I picked it up, I had to tell you how I got into that room in the first place because 18 months earlier, nobody at Franklin Family House knew my name. For that matter, I wasn't always sure I did either. The divorce was fair, which sounds better than it felt. We sold the house, divided accounts. I got my share of marital assets, plus a modest inheritance from my mother. I wasn't broke. I also wasn't sitting on a secret fortune. After attorney fees, buying a 2-bedroom condo, setting aside retirement money, and several uncomfortable meetings with a financial advisor, the message was clear. I'd be okay. But okay and done and working forever at 51 weren't the same. That realization hit me harder than I expected. I had worked before Emily was born, bookkeeping, office administration, payroll. Then plenty for Rick's company, especially in the early years. But paperwork has a funny memory. If nobody issued you a W-2, some people act like you spent 2 decades knitting decorative pillows. I went on interviews. One manager, maybe 35, looked at my resume. "So, you haven't worked full-time since 2003? I smiled. "Not anywhere that sent me a Christmas party invitation." He blinked. "I didn't get that job. Probably for the best." Eventually, a dentist, Dr. Patel, hired me 3 days a week for billing and bookkeeping. The pay wasn't glamorous. Neither was the office, with its fake ficus gathering dust since the Bush administration. But the first time I got a paycheck with my name on it, I sat in my car and stared at it. It wasn't the amount. It was mine. The first month was rough. Software had changed. I kept writing passwords on sticky notes, then hiding them so well I couldn't find them. One young assistant, bless her heart, said, "Claire, you can save those securely." I deadpanned. "I was saving things securely before you were born." She laughed. That helped. Around the same time, I started volunteering at Franklin Family House 1 Tuesday a week. My sister had spent weeks in Cleveland when her son was getting cancer treatment. A similar program had given them a place to sleep, breakfast, rides, and most importantly, fewer things to worry about. You never forget what practical kindness looks like when a family is scared. At Franklin, I started small, checking families in, restocking cereal, folding towels. Once, I spent 15 minutes helping a grandmother from Dayton fight a commercial washing machine. She slapped the lid and declared, "I raised 4 children. I refused to be defeated by a Maytag." I loved her immediately. I loved the place too. Nobody there knew me as Rick Bennett's wife. Nobody asked about my marriage. They asked if I could carry a box. I could. That was enough. A few months later, Franklin Family House started planning a $4.8 million expansion. Daniel Mercer chaired the effort. One Tuesday, sorting budget materials, I noticed a vendor estimate that looked off. I looked again. Then I asked Daniel, "Does this electrical number include work from the previous page?" He frowned. "Why?" "Because I think they counted part of it twice." He checked. He checked again. They had. Daniel looked at me like I'd just pulled a rabbit out of a filing cabinet. "How did you catch that?" I shrugged. 26 years married to a contractor. Eventually, drywall becomes part of your personality. That was the beginning. He started asking me to sit in on planning meetings, then capital campaign meetings. At first, I kept asking, "Are you sure?" Eventually, he said, "Claire, if I weren't sure, I'd stop inviting you." Fair enough. I knew construction basics. I knew budgets. And whether Rick ever realized it or not, I knew people. For years, I'd sat beside him at dinners with bankers, suppliers, retired business owners, hospital board members. Rick remembered the men who shook his hand. I remembered their wives' names, their kids, which causes they cared about, who hated golf, who collected old cars, who always ordered decaf after dinner and complained it tasted like punishment. That turned out to matter. When Daniel started looking for donors to anchor a matching campaign, I introduced him to two retired business owners I'd known for years. They agreed to help create a $1 million matching challenge. My own contribution was smaller, $100,000 over 3 years. That was not pocket change for me. I met with my financial advisor twice. The first time, she said, "You know, you don't have to prove anything." I said, "I know." The second time I told her, "I'm not proving anything. I want to do it." She nodded. "Then let's make sure you can." That mattered, too. I asked Daniel not to put my name on anything. No plaque, no donor wall, no big announcement. He thought I was being modest. I told him I was being practical. The truth was simpler. I wanted one thing in my life that didn't somehow turn into a conversation about Rick. For almost a year, Franklin Family House became that thing. Then, 3 months before the gala, Bennett Commercial Construction submitted a bid. The minute I saw the company name, I went straight to Daniel. "I can't be involved in this." He knew what I meant. Agreed. I signed the conflict disclosure. I stopped attending any meetings where Rick's bid was discussed. I didn't see pricing. I didn't review proposals. I didn't ask who was ahead. I stayed out of it completely. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. About 2 weeks before the gala, I ran into Melissa at a coffee shop. I was waiting for my order when she came up beside me. "Well, look who's suddenly everywhere." I turned. "Good morning, Melissa." She ordered some complicated drink that required enough instructions to qualify as a renovation permit. Then, casually, she said, "Rick's feeling very good about the Franklin project." I looked at her. "I wouldn't know." "Oh, right. You're not involved." "I'm not." She smiled. "He knows he's going to win." There was something about the way she said knows. I noticed it. Then I told myself not to. Rick had always been confident, sometimes obnoxiously so. Still, after 26 years, I knew his different versions of confidence. There was the public one. Then there was the one he had when he believed he possessed an advantage nobody else knew about. I had seen that face across negotiation tables for years. For half a second, I wondered what he knew. Then I did something divorce had finally taught me to do. I minded my own business. Not every strange look from an ex-husband requires an investigation. Which brings me back to that conference room. By the time I stood across from Daniel that Saturday night, I wasn't Rick Bennett's abandoned ex-wife sneaking into someone else's fundraiser. I had spent nearly a year helping build that campaign. Rick simply didn't know it. Daniel tapped the printed email. I picked it up. At the top was the name of Bennett Commercial's attorney. I read the first paragraph. Then the second. By the third, I understood. They were questioning whether my position with the charity had influenced the bidding process. My eyes went back to Daniel. "I haven't seen a single bid." "I know. I signed the recusal." "I know that, too." I looked down again. The language was so careful. Nobody actually accused me of anything. That made it worse. They were just raising concerns, seeking clarification, protecting the integrity of the process. I had lived with Rick long enough to recognize insurance when I saw it. If he won, he could forget the email ever existed. If he lost, he already had a story. His bitter ex-wife had interfered. I put the page down. So that's what this is. Daniel leaned back. I'm afraid so. For the first time that evening, Rick's joke at registration stopped mattering. This was different. That insult had been cheap. This could damage something I actually cared about. I reread the email. Rick's lawyer had done a beautiful job of accusing me without actually accusing me. No sentence Daniel could point to and say, "There, that's a lie." Instead, questions. Had the charity taken appropriate steps? Had individuals with personal relationships been excluded? Could they confirm no confidential information had been shared? I put the paper down. He's setting this up in case he loses. That's my concern, Daniel said. If Bennett gets the contract, nobody mentions this. If he doesn't, Rick gets to tell people his ex-wife was behind it. Daniel nodded. I pushed my chair back. Then maybe I shouldn't be downstairs tonight. His expression hardened. Why? Because you have 400 people here, Daniel. Donors, board members, contractors. Half of Columbus seems to know the other half. If this starts going around. You followed every conflict rule we have. I know what I did. What I'm worried about is what people think I did. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, Claire, I'm not asking you to disappear because somebody else finds your existence inconvenient. That shut me up. Not because it was profound, but because it was embarrassingly familiar. For years, whenever Rick was uncomfortable, I adjusted. Changed the subject, smoothed things over, skipped something, explained something, made myself slightly less visible so the evening would go better. Apparently, some habits survived the marriage. Daniel stood. Stay. Eat dinner. Let us handle the bid. I picked up my purse. You make it sound easy. No, I make it sound like my problem. I gave him a look. He opened the door. Tonight, your problem is the chicken. That bad. I've been to the tasting. That got a laugh out of me. By the time I returned downstairs, cocktail hour was ending. I'd made it about 20 feet toward the ballroom when Rick stepped into my path. What were you doing upstairs? No, hello. Talking to Daniel about what charity business? About my bid. He studied my face. That used to bother me, the way he looked at me when he thought I was hiding something. Now it mostly annoyed me. I'm serious, Claire. So am I. Melissa appeared beside him, glass of white wine in hand. She looked from Rick to me. Everything okay? Fine, I said. Rick said nothing. Melissa sighed, as though we were two difficult children. Claire, this really isn't the place to make things personal. I looked at her. Melissa, I was checking in. You two brought the personal part with you. She opened her mouth, then decided against whatever was coming. Rick lowered his voice. The contract will go where it should go. There it was again. That certainty. Not hope, not confidence in his company. Certainty. And I remembered Melissa at the coffee shop. He knows he's going to win. For a moment, I saw the old Rick, the man I'd watched across conference tables for 26 years. He had a particular calm when he knew something the other person didn't. I noticed it, then I walked away. Dinner started. My table included board members, a retired pediatrician, an insurance broker. Nobody asked about my divorce. Nobody mentioned Rick. It was a relief, and Daniel had been right about the chicken. At 8:15, the lights dimmed. Daniel walked onto the stage. He talked about the families Franklin had served, showed photos of the expansion. Then the fundraising campaign. As many of you know, he said, we entered tonight with a $1 million matching challenge. People applauded. Daniel smiled. I have some news. The room quieted. Our matching donors have agreed to increase that challenge tonight to $1.5 million, provided we reach our goal before this evening is over. The applause was louder. I sat up straighter. That was news to me. The woman beside me whispered, Did you know about this?
No.
Daniel continued, and there's somebody in this room who deserves a great deal of credit for bringing those donors to this table. Oh no. I stared at him. Daniel looked directly toward my table. We had discussed this. More accurately, I had discussed it and Daniel had complained. Across the ballroom, I saw Rick turn in his chair to follow Daniel's gaze. Melissa leaned toward him. Daniel opened his mouth. Then Franklin's executive director, Susan, appeared at the edge of the stage. She wasn't walking, she was moving with purpose. Daniel noticed her. Susan said something quietly when he leaned down. His smile vanished. He put the microphone back. "Excuse me for just a moment." Conversation immediately erupted. Susan came straight toward my table. "Claire, could you come with us?" My stomach dropped. I followed her and Daniel through a service door. Daniel held up his phone. "One of our major donors just received this." It was an email. Attached were screenshots from internal Franklin correspondence. My name appeared several times. At first glance, they looked terrible. One message showed me discussing expansion costs. Another, asking about contractor qualifications. Then a later email mentioning Bennett Commercial. Whoever assembled them had removed dates, replies, and surrounding messages. It looked as though I had been involved throughout the bidding process. I hadn't. "These are from before I recused myself," I said. "I know," Susan said. "And that one isn't even about Rick's bid. It's about the preliminary budget." "We know. Does the donor know?" Daniel gave me a look that answered that question. "Who sent it?" "We're checking." "How many people?" "We don't know yet." That was the part that scared me. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I suddenly understood how easy it would be to make it look as though I had. My anonymous involvement, which had felt private and clean, could now be made to sound secretive. Secret donor, ex-wife, construction project, ex-husband's company competing for the work. Put those facts in the wrong order, and you could tell a very different story. About 10 minutes later, Susan returned. The email hadn't gone to the whole ballroom. One donor had received it. He showed it to a board member. That man asked another person, and from there, the rumor did what rumors do when you put 400 people in formal clothes and give them wine. It traveled. Susan said, "We're trying to contain it." I almost laughed. You can contain water. You can contain a dog. A rumor at a charity gala? Good luck. Daniel asked his staff to pull the original email chain. I stood near the service entrance. Then I looked through the open doorway into the ballroom. Rick was talking to a man at his table. Melissa sat beside him. Her phone was in her hand. I don't know why I kept looking at her. Maybe 20 years of friendship teaches you things, too. Melissa glanced toward the doorway. She saw me. For 1 second, we just looked at each other. Then she turned her phone face down on the table. And suddenly, Rick wasn't the only person I was wondering about. My first thought was Rick. My second was Melissa. And I hated that I couldn't tell which possibility bothered me more. Rick had the obvious motive. If he could make people question my role before the contract was awarded, he'd have an explanation if Bennett Commercial lost. But Melissa knew me. She knew exactly which accusation would get under my skin. I started toward their table. Daniel caught my arm lightly. "Where are you going?" To ask Melissa a question. "No, Daniel. We don't accuse anyone until we know." I wasn't planning to accuse her. He raised one eyebrow. "Claire." "All right, I was planning to strongly inquire." "Wait 10 minutes." I hated that advice, mostly because it was good advice. I turned around and went to the women's restroom instead. Nobody inside except me and a ridiculous arrangement of white roses. I stood there, looking at myself in the mirror. For the first time that night, I seriously considered leaving. Not dramatically, just my coat, my car, my quiet little condo. Maybe getting involved with Franklin had been a mistake. Maybe I'd been fooling myself when I said this part of my life had nothing to do with Rick. Now his company was bidding, his lawyer was questioning my integrity, and someone was passing around pieces of my emails. I pulled out my phone to call a rideshare. Before I could, it rang. Emily. My daughter. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. "Hi, honey." "Mom, are you at the Franklin Gala?" "Yes, and Dad's there." I closed my eyes. "Yes, so is Melissa." That wasn't a question. "How do you know?" She posted a picture. Of course she had. Emily paused. "Is Dad bothering you?" No, everything's fine. Silence. Then my daughter said, "You always say that." I leaned against the counter. "I'm at a charity dinner, Emily. I'm not going to drag you into whatever your father and I." Mom. Something in her voice stopped me cold.
I love Dad, she said.
You know I do. But you don't have to keep making him sound better for me. I don't. Yes, you do. Every time something happens, you give me the version where nobody really did anything wrong. I was trying not to make you choose. I'm 27. I can love somebody and still know when they're wrong. That landed harder than I wanted it to. I had spent most of Emily's life believing that protecting her meant absorbing whatever I could before it reached her. Maybe somewhere along the way I'd confused protecting her with protecting Rick. "I have to go," I said. "Okay. I'm fine." Emily laughed softly. "There you go again." Despite everything, I smiled. "I'll call you tomorrow. Love you, Mom." "Love you, too." I put the phone away. I didn't suddenly become fearless. I still wanted to go home, but I stopped reaching for the rideshare app. When I returned to the hallway, Susan was waiting. "We found it." Daniel joined us. Susan held up her tablet. Melissa received the original email chain. I stared at her.
How?
Auction committee. About 6 weeks earlier, a Franklin employee had accidentally copied Melissa on an internal chain while sending Gala materials to volunteers. The thread included several older attachments from the expansion planning stage. Melissa had no reason to receive them. She also had no reason to keep them, but she had. The email sent to the donor tonight had come from her personal account. For a moment, I didn't say anything. 20 years. Birthdays, Christmases, hospital waiting rooms, coffee at my kitchen table. And somehow, we had arrived here. Daniel said, "We need to speak with her privately." "I want to be there." He looked at me. "I think you should be." Melissa came into the conference room 10 minutes later. Rick came with her. The minute she saw me sitting beside Daniel, she knew. "What is this?" Susan closed the door. "We need to ask you about an email sent tonight." Melissa glanced at Rick. He looked genuinely confused. Susan placed a printed copy on the table. Melissa's face changed. Rick picked it up. "What the hell is this?" Nobody answered him. Susan asked Melissa, "Did you send this?" Melissa folded her arms. "I sent someone information I thought they had a right to know." Rick looked at her. "You did this." "I was protecting you." She looked at me. From her. I almost admired the simplicity. "Melissa, he's 55. He's a contractor, not a sea turtle." Daniel looked down. Susan suddenly became very interested in rearranging papers. Rick did not laugh. "This isn't funny," he said.
"No," I said.
"It really isn't." Melissa leaned toward me. "You've been trying to make him look bad ever since the divorce." "By doing what?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I waited. "So far tonight," I said. "I checked in, ate half a chicken breast, and got accused of manipulating a contract I haven't seen." "Which part was my attack?" Rick turned back to Melissa. "You had no right to send that." Her expression changed instantly. "Oh, don't you dare." "What?" "Don't stand there pretending you're innocent." Rick went still. Melissa laughed once. "Tell them." He didn't move. "Tell them why you were so sure about the bid." The room got quiet, and suddenly I was back in that coffee shop.
He knows he's going to win.
I looked at Rick. What is she talking about? Nothing. Melissa stared at him. "The spreadsheet, Rick." Daniel straightened. "What spreadsheet?" Rick rubbed a hand across his jaw. 2 months earlier, he explained, he'd had drinks with a former estimator who had recently left one of the companies competing for the Franklin project. The man had shown him part of a spreadsheet, preliminary numbers, pricing assumptions. Rick insisted he hadn't asked to see it. Daniel asked one question. "Did you photograph it?" Rick didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Finally, he said, "A portion." Susan stared at him. "You photographed another bidder's internal pricing?" "They weren't final numbers." Daniel's voice stayed remarkably calm. "That's not the point. I didn't copy their bid." "Still not the point." Rick looked at me, as if somehow I could translate the room into something more favorable. I couldn't. For years, I'd seen him push right up against lines because he believed not crossing them technically was the same as behaving well. Maybe I'd even helped him believe that. How much did you use? I asked. I didn't use it. Then why photograph it? He had no answer for that either. Melissa sat back in her chair. She looked almost satisfied now that Rick was in trouble, too. That may have been the saddest thing I'd seen all evening. Daniel stood. The procurement committee is going to suspend the process while we review this. Rick's head snapped toward him. Daniel, come on. No, you know my company. I do. We've worked in this city for 30 years, which is why you should know better. Rick's face tightened. Then he looked at me, not angry this time, but worried. Claire. I said nothing. Can we talk privately? I picked up my purse. We were private for 26 years, Rick. He waited. I opened the door. Look how that worked out. Rick followed me into the hallway. Claire, please. I stopped. Maybe I shouldn't have. At that point, I'd heard enough explanations from that man to last through retirement. But there was one thing I wanted to know, so I turned around. Rick glanced toward the conference room door. I didn't know Melissa was going to send that email. I believe you. That surprised him. Then you understand? No, don't get excited. He closed his mouth. I believe you didn't send the email, I said. I also believe your lawyer contacted the board and suggested I might be interfering with your bid. I had to protect the company from what? He looked irritated. You were suddenly involved here. Nobody told me how involved. Then my company bids on the expansion and what? You didn't know what I was doing? I stared at him. You could have asked. You wouldn't have told me. You didn't ask. He looked away. There it was. The same old argument in a new suit. For years, Rick had been very good at deciding what I thought without going through the inconvenience of asking me. Why did you think I'd interfere? I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know. Yes, you do. He looked toward the ballroom. Finally, he said, because I thought you hated me. That almost made me laugh. I did. For a while. I added. Then I got busy. He actually flinched a little at that. Not because it was cruel, but because I meant it. Rick lowered his voice. Claire, this could hurt a lot of people. Then you should have thought about that before you photographed somebody else's pricing. I told you they weren't final numbers. And Daniel told you that isn't the point. I never used them. Then why keep them? He exhaled sharply. I made a mistake. Yes. He seemed almost offended by how easily I agreed. Then came the part one should have expected. Can you talk to Daniel? I stared at him. About what? Tell him this has gotten blown out of proportion.
Tell him you know me.
You know I wouldn't cheat a children's charity. For a second, I saw us 15 years earlier. Rick getting too aggressive with a subcontractor. Rick offending a client. Rick saying something careless. And me afterwards, smoothing it out. He didn't mean it that way. Rick's under a lot of pressure. You know how he gets. I had spent years translating him into a more flattering language. I also knew you'd never end up with my best friend, I said. Apparently, my track record for knowing you isn't terrific.
His jaw tightened.
Melissa and I didn't start until after you, and I were already. I raised my hand.
No. What?
We're not talking about our divorce. You brought it up. I made one comparison. You're trying to reopen a 26-year marriage because you don't want to talk about what happened tonight. That stopped him. We're talking about the bid, I said. Stay there. He looked at me for a long moment. Then his shoulders dropped. What do you want me to do? That question would once have thrilled me. Finally, Rick needed something from me. But standing there, I didn't want anything from him. That's between you and the board. I went back into the conference room. The procurement committee met for another 20 minutes. No dramatic vote in the ballroom. No security guards. Nobody threatened to call the police. Real organizations are usually much less theatrical. They have policies, lawyers, and people who say things like risk exposure until everybody wants another drink. The committee decided the procurement process would be paused for an independent review. Because Rick had possessed information from a competing bidder, Bennett Commercial could no longer participate cleanly. He had two choices: Withdraw voluntarily or force the board to formally disqualify his company and document why.
Rick chose to withdraw.
He wasn't happy, but he wasn't stupid. By then, however, the rumor about me had moved through enough of the ballroom that Daniel had another problem. He couldn't simply continue dinner. He also couldn't turn a charity gala into an episode of courtroom television. So he went back to the microphone. I stood near the side of the ballroom. Rick had returned to his table. Melissa's chair was empty. Daniel waited until the room settled. "I want to address something briefly," he said. He explained that the construction procurement process had been paused to ensure fairness and transparency. One bidder had withdrawn. An independent review would be completed. No names, no accusations, no public humiliation. Then Daniel changed the subject. "Now," he said, "I'd like to get back to why we're actually here." Before he went any further, he looked at me. He stepped away from the microphone and came over. "Claire," he whispered. "What? May I finally say your name?" I knew exactly what he meant. 6 months earlier, my answer would have been an automatic no. That night, I looked across the room. I saw Rick. Then I saw the families Franklin had helped, the volunteers, the staff, people I had worked beside for almost a year. "Yes," I said. Daniel went back on stage. He explained the matching challenge. Then he told them I had helped connect Franklin with the donors who made it possible. He mentioned the budget work, the campaign meetings, my $100,000 commitment over 3 years. And, importantly, he explained that I had formally removed myself from every discussion involving Bennett Commercial. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "Some people walk into a room, hoping everyone already knows who they are. Claire spent the better part of a year asking us not to tell anybody." People laughed softly, then they applauded. Nobody jumped onto a chair. There was no movie-style standing ovation. Most people simply clapped. But near the back, a woman named Denise stood up. Her 8-year-old son had spent 11 weeks in treatment that spring. I'd checked Denise into Franklin on a Tuesday afternoon when she hadn't slept properly in 3 days. Then an older man named Walter stood. His granddaughter had stayed with us. A few volunteers followed. That was the moment that got me. Not the donors, not Rick.
Them.
I looked across the ballroom once more. Rick was watching me, and I could see the exact second he understood what had happened downstairs. I hadn't come to that gala looking for access to wealthy people. I was one of the people who had helped bring them there. Later, near the registration desk, Rick found me again. For once, he didn't look angry. "I didn't know," he said. I picked up my coat. "That was always part of our problem, Rick. You stopped asking." He glanced back toward the ballroom. "Mercer really was waiting for you." I smiled a little. Apparently. Then I left. No champagne thrown in anyone's face. No mysterious millionaire waiting outside. Just my car on the 4th level of the parking garage. I got inside and took off those ridiculous shoes. I put them on the passenger side floor and sat there for almost 10 minutes. I didn't start the engine. I'd imagined moments like this after the divorce. Rick finally seeing me differently. Rick realizing what he had lost. I thought it would feel like winning. It didn't. Mostly I felt tired. Then, slowly, something else, lighter. Because he had finally seen me. And somehow, that mattered much less than it used to. The next morning, at 8:17, I was drinking coffee when my phone buzzed. "Melissa." One sentence. "You won. Are you happy?" I typed 3 different answers, deleted all 3. Then I put the phone face down because for the first time I understood what Melissa still didn't. There had never been a contest. The review took 4 weeks. That probably tells you more about real life than anything else in this story. Big emotional moments happen on Saturday nights. Actual consequences arrive on Tuesdays in emails with attachments. Franklin Family House hired an outside attorney. She went through meeting minutes, emails, access records, conflict disclosures, enough paperwork to make everybody regret ever inventing committees. My part was straightforward. I had disclosed my relationship to Bennett Commercial the moment Rick's company entered the process. I had signed the recusal. I hadn't attended bid meetings. I hadn't reviewed pricing. I hadn't communicated with any competing contractors. In other words, I had done exactly what I said I'd done. Melissa's part was equally clear. She had received material she wasn't supposed to, kept it, then selected pieces of old correspondence and sent them without the context that showed when and why I had been involved. Franklin removed her from all volunteer work. No lawsuit, no police, no dramatic scene where someone escorted her out. They simply told her they no longer trusted her with confidential information. Sometimes that sentence does more damage than shouting ever could. Rick's situation was more complicated. The review couldn't establish that Bennett Commercial had directly copied another company's bid. Rick kept insisting the numbers he photographed were preliminary, and technically he was right. But the review confirmed he had possessed information from a competitor and failed to disclose it. Bennett Commercial was removed from consideration for the Franklin project. That was the consequence. Not bankruptcy, not ruin. The company kept operating. His employees kept their jobs, which mattered to me. Some of those people had worked there 15 or 20 years. They had mortgages and kids and aging parents. They didn't deserve to lose anything because Rick had convinced himself a line didn't count until both feet crossed it. But Columbus business circles aren't as large as people think. Word got around. Not every detail. Enough. A couple of nonprofit board members became less eager to recommend Bennett Commercial. One developer apparently asked Rick some uncomfortable questions. His company survived. His reputation got a dent. I could live with that. As for Rick and Melissa, I heard through mutual friends that things between them became difficult after the gala. Rick blamed her for sending the email. Melissa blamed him for backing away from her the second it became embarrassing. I didn't ask for updates. That surprised some people. One old friend called and said, "Don't you want to know what's happening?" Not particularly. "Oh, come on." "Why?" She went quiet. I said, "If they're miserable together, they don't need my supervision." She laughed so hard she had to put the phone down. There are some forms of revenge you really shouldn't interfere with. A few weeks after the gala, Emily drove up from Cincinnati on a Sunday. She arrived around 11 with pastries and announced that my coffee was terrible. "My coffee is perfectly fine. Mom, you buy whatever's on sale." That's how people afford retirement. She made a fresh pot anyway. We took our mugs onto my little balcony, 2 chairs, a small table, and a planter I'd been unsuccessfully trying to keep alive since May. Emily tucked one leg underneath herself. Dad called me. I felt my shoulders tighten before I could stop them. "I don't want you in the middle." "I know. Whatever happened between your father and me, Mom?" I stopped. She gave me that look children eventually learn from their mothers and then have the nerve to use against them. "He said you embarrassed him publicly." I stared into my coffee. "I didn't." "I know." That made me look up. Emily shrugged. "I asked him what you actually did." "What did he say?" "He got very quiet." I laughed. I couldn't help it. Emily smiled, but only for a second. Then she said, "Can I tell you something without you fixing it?" That's an ominous question.
Mom.
All right. She set down her mug. "I need you to stop protecting Dad when you talk to me." "I don't protect him." "You do." I started to argue. Then I remembered our phone call from the gala restroom. Emily continued. "You did it through the whole divorce. You'd say things like, 'Your dad's under pressure,' or 'There are two sides,' or 'Don't be angry with him because of me.' I didn't want you choosing between us." I wasn't asking to choose. Her voice wasn't angry. That made it harder. "I love Dad," she said. "He's my father, but I'm an adult. I can love him and still know when he behaves badly." I looked at her. I thought I was helping. "I know." There wasn't much to say after that. So I reached over and squeezed her hand. Then she looked at my planter. "Is that basil?"
It was.
"What happened?" Apparently, it chose a side. That broke the tension. By spring, Franklin Family House had selected another contractor. Construction started in April. The fundraising campaign exceeded its goal, thanks partly to the expanded matching challenge. I kept my job at Dr. Patel's office 3 days a week. I didn't have to. I wanted to. There was something reassuring about knowing where I needed to be on Monday morning. Daniel eventually talked me into joining Franklin's board. During my first official meeting, he leaned toward me. "Now, can we put your name on something?" "Maybe a broom closet." "Already sponsored." "Of course it is." A few months later, I ran into Rick at the grocery store. Of all places, the coffee aisle. No tuxedo, no Melissa, no chairman. Just Rick standing there comparing two bags of coffee that differed by about $3. For some reason, that made me smile. This man had once seemed capable of determining whether my entire future would be happy or miserable. Now, he was trying to decide whether Colombian roast was worth an extra $3. Claire. Hi, Rick. We stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then he said, I've been meaning to apologize. I waited. He looked uncomfortable. Good apologies apparently weren't one of the skills he'd acquired during our separation. Finally, he said, I underestimated you. I thought about that, then shook my head. You didn't underestimate me, Rick. He frowned. You stopped seeing me. He didn't answer. And the remarkable thing was I didn't need him to. I put the coffee in my cart and kept shopping. After the divorce, I used to imagine revenge in very specific ways. Rick would see me happy. He'd regret Melissa. He'd finally understand how much I'd contributed to our marriage. He'd realize what he'd lost. It took me a while to notice that every one of those fantasies still put Rick at the center. His regret was still the prize. That's what changed for me that night at the gala. Not because Daniel Mercer knew my name, not because donors applauded, and certainly not because Rick looked embarrassed. It changed at that registration table when the man I'd spent 26 years with tried to make me feel small, and I realized I didn't have to convince him I wasn't. The hostess scanned my invitation twice and said into her radio, Tell the chairman she's here. For most of my marriage, I think I was waiting for somebody to announce me like that, to tell the room I mattered. At 52, I finally understood something. You don't need permission to belong in a life you've built. Sometimes you just have to show up. If you've ever had someone mistake your silence for weakness, or discovered that starting over isn't the same as starting from nothing, you probably know what I mean. What would you have done in my place when that email was leaked? Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you loved and rebuilt your life? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below.